Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Office Hours. Let us know where you're coming in from. See a lot of familiar
Hello,
faces
hello.
in the chat. Hey. um, I'm here with Didi Medina. I'm super excited today because we're going to talk all things weekly planning, weekly retrospectives, and how we've both kind of built this in as a really integral habit as part of our weekly routine. So if you've never been to an office hours before, you're more than welcome to ask questions about Notion or kind of, the conversation that's happening. But I do recommend using the ask question area below just so your question doesn't get missed. We will do a bit of screen sharing if that's cool, but also we can kind of leave this open to where the conversation goes, because I know, Didi, you've got some strong opinions about weekly planning and weekly retrospective. So I'd love to pass it over to you and just to maybe have you tell us a little bit about the work that you do and kind of why weekly retrospectives are so powerful for you.
Yeah, let's see. So for me, a little bit of background on myself. So I'm a product designer by background. I lived in Silicon Valley for about 5 to 6 years, worked with some awesome companies like Teespring, Mixbook, and then moved back to New York for a bit, got into product management further in my career. Now I live in Israel. I'm a consultant. I build and rebuild product design teams. So I pretty much go into companies, usually past their Series A, help them more formalize their processes. And I am a massive process junkie, but I'm also very creative. So I try to find a way to benefit from process in a way that it doesn't make the things I love doing boring, but at the same time is more predictable. I guess like the predictability is a key part, because like when things are not predictable, you end up putting out a lot of fires. And one of the biggest things that works for me is obviously, as part of my system, on a weekly basis, looking over what it is I'm doing, why am I doing it, what did I do last week, how far did I get along, what are the things I need to address. And I found that if I didn't do that periodically, turns out to be on a weekly basis, things just started to slip and things became way less predictable and just blew up in my face across the board. So it serves me. I spend significantly less effort than most people doing things throughout my week. I find that a lot of people start with the question of like doing retros, planning. It's super, super taxing on time, right? Like I got to block out 2 hours to do this. It takes that long, in my opinion. And honestly, I find it like to be a massive investment. At the end of the day, like I spend 2 hours doing that, and I spend maybe 9-10 hours on average not putting out fires throughout the week.
Right.
So there's your savings, right? So today I'm going to be excited to like share kind of like the theory and kind of like my process of finding this is going to be meta, my process of finding a process that works for me.
Yeah. And I'm sure we have a
Yeah.
lot of process people driven here who are, just excited to learn a bit about that. I don't know if you saw the polls below, and if you haven't answered those polls, I was just asking people kind of, do you already have a weekly planning process? Nobody has said yes, and I love it. So most people said kind of, but it's not a habit yet. And no, please send help. Yes, and I'm curious about improving it. So it's kind of interesting to see where people are at with that. So I'm curious, because obviously you've done a lot of iteration and exploration to find like the weekly was kind of that frame of time that made a lot of sense for you. So do you do things like quarterly planning, monthly planning? Kind of tell me a little bit about how you landed on weekly being that kind of magical time frame.
So I find that planning happens on multiple levels. It's not, I do weekly planning, I don't do any other planning. I do yearly planning, I do quarterly audits and refactoring on my yearly plan. And then I do weekly planning and retrospectives as well. So retrospective, for those who are international, because that's like kind of like a big weird word that most people don't know. It's just a process of reflecting and looking back at what you did. And then the planning comes after that. So I like to call it weekly retro and planning. And because of that, it's how I wrap up the week. It's the wrap, right? That's how I like to call it. But yeah, I definitely do yearly, quarterly, and weekly.
Amazing. Do you want to dive into any of the specifics of your weekly planning, or do you have some pretty strong opinions that you kind of want to share, or any of those sort of deeper philosophies of kind of just why it matters so much?
So let's start with the question of like, why not plan bi-weekly, right? So we know there's different increments. Like we do a year, everybody understands why we plan a year, right? That's kind of obvious. But why to do a quarter also makes sense. But why a week? Why not 2 weeks? So I guess it's not, you have to habit, it's okay to do every 2 weeks. What I found from my practice of doing these planning and retrospectives is when I try to plan today what I'm going to do, say 2 weeks out, I start having a massive amount of diminishing returns. Like it starts getting significantly less accurate. I tell myself, okay, I'm like, not this week, but next week, the week after that, on a Wednesday, I'm going to be ready to do X. Like it tends to not be true. Right. And obviously planning 2 weeks takes longer than planning 1 week.
Yeah.
So once I started seeing like the diminishing returns on going that far out, I kind of trimmed it down and it's like, fine, let's try 1 week. And then it kind of like worked. And so the obvious next question is like, why not do daily planning? Right? Why do weekly planning? And I find that when you're working on more complicated objectives, more complicated tasks, you don't really finish anything within a day. Right? Say, for example, take design. I'm from the world of design. I tell myself I need to design a website. A lot of tasks make more sense to break up into multiple days, right? I might come in on day one and say, today I'm going to brainstorm it, but I need some like time to myself to kind of let it sit before I start working on it again. So it's more beneficial to me to be able to look at the week and say, Sunday, I'm going to be like brainstorming it. Tuesday, after like 2 days of kind of sitting on it, I'll be able to start my first design session. Then I need to sit on it again. And then Thursday, I'm going to wrap it up. Now, when I can do that, now I have other gaps to fill. And again, because I can look at the week, I can more productively fill my time. Whereas like if you did it by the day, you find yourself being really reactive and you're not stacking things and sequencing things as effectively.
Yeah. So I'm guessing you probably find yourself just working a lot less now. Like you said, you're not putting out fires as much. So I'm assuming that's like one of the things you've noticed since doing these weekly retrospectives and just weekly planning process.
Absolutely. But sometimes like I find myself like breaking the habit. I'll stop doing like retros. Like I'll come back from vacation. I've been off for like a month or something. And then I'm not getting back into my full routine. And I'm getting like really frustrated where things are slipping. And I'm like, Didi, you're not doing your retros. And I'm like, oh no, but it's fine. And then you go back and I'm like, oh, everything's back into where it's supposed to be. But yeah,
I find the exact same thing. If I don't do it, it's like the whole week is like a dominoes and it just impacts everything else. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also I think more than anything, when you plan your week, right, work, a lot of people think about their retrospectives or planning around work, because that's where if you mess up, there's the highest cost. Right. But to me, it's like, what happens if I mess up with a client? Well, I need to fix that. I need to like stay overtime. I need to like figure out a way to make something work at that moment. But what does that come at the cost of? Well, it comes at the cost of me not being able to attend to my friendships, my relationships, my personal life, and all that different stuff. And to me, that's like significantly even more important, right? It's a lifestyle. It's like I work not so I can make money. I work so I can have a life. And by giving a little more planning, I can ensure that, I have 2 hours set aside to talk to my sister about her career plans. I have, the weekend to like actually take some rest, right? And that I think is also really important. It gives you that sense of clarity, which is also why personally I like doing it on Friday. Right. So I do my retros and planning on Friday, because Saturday I'm like off,
tapped out.
like entire, like off. Right. It doesn't matter what happens. I'm not going to work. And when you do it on Friday, before you go into your day off or your weekend off, you're more clear headed. Right. You're never questioning throughout the weekend. Did I get everything I needed to get done? Am I going to have enough a week to get to that? Because I know this is still open, but I know I can do it next week. But will it like backfire? Is it like set aside? Like, but when you can answer all those concerns before you go into the weekend, trust me, you sleep like a baby. I
really like that. I really like that, because I've done mine on Sundays, but I think you bring up a really good point, is that do it as part of your end of week wrap up before you do the Saturday checkout. I just love it. Yeah, I might have to make that change.
Wrap. It's the weekly retro I'm planning. It's the wrap. It's how you close things down.
So the other question I have about that is how much of the personal life ends up in your weekly planning, or does any of it? Or when you do your weekly planning, is it just your planning work so that you're just leaving that free time for your personal life? Or is there any kind of blend of the two?
It's always a blend of the two. So I don't believe in planning in a vacuum. I believe that everything serves your lifestyle. That would be like the top end. don't call it just like a very fluffy thing. I call it a lifestyle. Your happiness is a byproduct of you being in a situation where you feel like you're living the way you want to live. You're carrying out your values, all these different things. Yeah. And your personal life and professional life kind of try to occupy the same time. Right? You will feel like you're living the life you want to be living if you have the time to do the things you want to do. And these things are constantly at like odds with each other. Like I need to work more to make more money. I need to like be with my friends more. Like, and you have to find constantly the balance, and it's a negotiation that happens on a weekly balance, on a weekly, I think, cadence. And you know, when I write down takeaways, I'm not limiting it to like work. I might find that I couldn't get something done because I just broke up with my ex, for example, right? And that's really important. Like, okay, there's a personal issue that's affecting my performance with work, right? And when you kind of separate them out, you're looking at half the scope. You're not going to find like really good answers.
And just noticing those patterns, right? Like since kind of tracking all of that stuff in the last year, being like, oh, interesting how my moods, when I track those compared to what was happening in my life, compared to how productive I felt, and you can see more of a big picture of what's really happening. And I'm curious. I mean, obviously, this is something that you've developed over time for a long time. I'm not sure how long you've been using Notion to maybe do your retrospectives, but I know personally, I feel like the tracking has become an easier habit to adopt since using Notion. But I'm curious for you, were there other tools you were using Notion now? Kind of what has that looked like in terms of, I guess, having the tools support the process?
Yeah, I was doing Notion. I was doing retros before I was using Notion. I've been doing retros strictly for about 2 years now, since I've gone self-employed. And I guess like when you go self-employed, you realize you can't like just
you need way more structure. Anymore.
You kind of have to learn how to self-manage to a whole nother level. So I started off in Dropbox Paper. I was doing them once a week in there. Then Notion finally launched its new version. I think it was Notion 2, right? And I looked at it and I was like, okay, I was using Airtable for my CRM. I was using Dropbox for my retros and documentation and all that different stuff. And my CRM was like fire. I had so much automation going on in there. When I came to Notion, I bit that, lack of API bullet real hard, like when on the get-go. So like, this is a little ping, because I know everybody in the chat, but get that API out. I need to get back to my Zapier life. But the thing is, for all the time the automation saved me, consolidation saved me double. Right. So it's like I saved way more time not needing to ping pong between several tools, more than the time it saved me to run some like cool automations in the background on my CRM. So like when I came into Notion, I started building out like my stack. I also inherited a lot of the things I was doing in Airtable. I kind of built a lot of architecture there as to how my CRM works, how this works, all the different stuff. And I kind of like ported it over. And I started doing weekly retros and planning in Notion, I think now for about a year and a half, I think, like since version 2. I was like in there like after it launched, like right after.
Got a couple questions that have come in. Let's start with the easy one. Tangent question. Okay. What camera is Didi using? Looks better than a webcam.
Okay, so this is like a fun story. So I was looking for a webcam. I have an external monitor like a lot of us do. I have my laptop connected to it. And webcams from Logitech are like $200. And I'm a designer, so I own a DSLR. And then there was like this little item that's called like Elgato Cam Link, which just allows you to use your HDMI feed from your camera as a webcam source, right? So, and that was like 150. So it's cheaper than the really good Logitech cameras, which don't come close. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then it kind of built on that. Now I got lighting, I got good microphones, and it's just like, all right, if I'm here, I might as well like splurge. It's like, you go to the Apple store. It's like, I need a laptop. Fuck it. I'll get an iPad too. I got a pencil. I'll get some new AirPods. Yeah.
You're going to do it. You got to do it.
AirPod Pros, like that's kind of like what happened. So now I'm glad everybody's benefiting from it.
That's awesome. Chris asked, the mental block I have with planning, weekly, quarterly, yearly, is that you cannot control the future. There's many unexpected variables that have completely destroyed any past efforts of planning in the past. How do you account for this in your planning process? Love this question.
So that's an amazing question. So I'm going to give the answer I got when I asked this question to my mentor, like I think like several years back. He answered with like the statement which kind of sinks in. No war has ever gone unplanned. No war has ever gone according to plan, right? The purpose of a plan is not to be bulletproof. So let's start there, set your expectations, right? Now, this is also why, like I said, I don't plan more than a week, because like you said, there's like diminishing returns. There's at a certain point, like you over plan and it doesn't go according to plan. It's like, well, what was the point of doing that? But there is a sweet spot. There's a certain amount of planning you want to do that gives you benefit. There's also a certain process you want to go with, a certain methodology, if you may, to go with that definitely yields more results than others. So you can assess how people plan and see that there's massive differences. So not all plans are made equal. Hopefully today we can share some really, really good tips. But yeah, it's a lot. We're going to share a lot of the theory as well. So like you'll be able to like take a lot of what I share or the templates I'm going to share more as like a starting point, and feel free to like just remove certain sections and add other things and find the thing that works for you. If I showed like what my template will look like 2 years ago, it looks very different than what it does now. And that iterated over several times, like more, like I think like 12 times. I changed the order of which I do my retros, right? Like, do I start with like takeaways? Do I start with like, different things? So like I've rearranged order and see how that affected things. So, it definitely want to find the sweet spot that works for you. There's definitely best practices and we'll share those. And yeah, I think there's definitely still value in planning. So see that.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. It's like the sometimes even just doing the plan or kind of tracking your time, or even just it's just about awareness of how often is what you're putting on your schedule 2-3 times more than the actual time that you have. And I think Jessica, who's here, has this amazing formula roll up that she did inside of her, I think it's her daily agenda, it might be weekly, where it actually adds up all of the available hours that she has and gives her like a margin number. So she can actually see a number that goes, you have 30 more hours scheduled in your calendar than you actually have time for. So sometimes it's like turning the Titanic around. It takes time. So it's just like slowly getting a little bit more and more accurate, and still knowing that the plan is always going to change. Like I just got asked to speak at a conference next month. It's like, well, that wasn't in the plan, but now I have to make time for that. And so leaving a bit of that margin has to be part of the plan as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, just remember, nothing's fatal either, right? Like it's just like everything's negotiable. Someone throws a wrench in. Let's just call that person life, right? Does it a lot. I don't know why they don't stop. It doesn't stop. It just constantly throws wrenches into it, and you adjust. Like you have to. It just and with good methodology, like overall, your net productivity is going to be higher, right? You're not looking at was it accurate 100% of the time. It's to say, doing this in comparison to not doing it, does that yield me more results? And if it yields me more results, then it's worth doing. If not, don't do it. Right? There's definitely, you want to look at like the cost and gain ratio and say, fine, if I'm exerting 2 more hours, what am I gaining from it? For me, it was like I spend 3 hours doing retros and planning every week. I gain about 7 to 12 hours. And I sleep like a baby. And my sleep is actually more important than the time I sleep. So that's what does it for me. And there's always like there's extra stuff on top of it, but definitely keep yourself honest. And that's also part of your retros. I think like that's one of my biggest things, like while I started this process, is in your retros, as meta as it sounds, reflect on how your retros are like serving you, right? Like that's really important. It's like, am I feeling like this is working? No, like what's not working? How can I improve it? What's the nuance? What am I avoiding? What is working? Like all that different stuff, put it in there as well.
I find asking, what could I do better? And I have a daily question that I ask that of, and then my weekly agenda rolls that up so I can see a list of all the things that I said I could do better this week. And you'd be surprised how many are actually the same week after week. It's always the same thing, like get outside, go for a walk, like do those things. So if you don't write them down, they disappear.
Yeah, it's just like a contract with yourself.
Yeah, totally. We have a couple other questions that came in that might be a little bit more specific to your actual Notion setup or your process. So I don't know if you wanted to hop into a screen share, if there's anything else you wanted to chat about before we go technical.
Let's see. Is there anything else like on theory? What's
a realistic
time frame?
Yeah, to move over from Evernote. Yes. What's a realistic time frame? Well, I'm wondering, I get people asking a lot of questions around how this seems like it takes a lot of time to learn Notion. And it does take a lot of time. But I think people see these really advanced setups and think like, oh no, it's going to take me forever to get there. But honestly, just having a really simple page where you're asking those questions, I think is a good starting point, right? So just start with the basics before you kind of need to go all crazy with the roll-ups and formulas and stuff. So I don't know how long it took you to adapt.
I just don't fear it not working 100% day one. Right.
Yeah.
And this is like everything. Like if you want like an insurance policy on your life's decision, you got to go find another planet. Like there's none of that. Right. So you got to have some tolerance to like try it out. You're going to see what works, what doesn't work, and constantly try to refactor. And trust me, it took me over 300 hours over the course of 2 years to find the architecture and setup in my Notion process that works. And that process is very taxing. It's worthwhile because it saves me a lot of time. I value that a lot, and I enjoy the process of designing these systems. So I definitely prefer to do it over other things I can be doing. So I'm not equal to everybody who tries to avoid this stuff. But definitely feel free just to go in. Notion is like an easy thing to use up front. It's just a document. You don't have to look at it as anything else. And over time, experiment with different things. As you experiment with different things, your brain kind of accumulates new dots, right? And remember, like your brain, the thing that it does really well is connecting dots. So as you try new things, whatever it is, all of a sudden you might have like a eureka moment, like, oh, when I mix this feature with that feature and mix it with that, holy shit! Like, and that's where the magic happens. And you try more complicated things, and that's how I got my setup to where it is. It's not like I came in like a pro, like just as naive as everybody else.
I love that. It's a process. It's funny. It's like, it's a process to find your process. Someone asked, Chris Rogers, in terms of theory, one of the challenges is planning the cognitive overload. Watching Marie's planning process seems overwhelming. Is there tips, suggestions to make this easier to comprehend? I don't know if that ties in with what we were just saying. Is just that like my setup is like the result of a year and a half of like obsessively tinkering inside of Notion, but there's no reason why that couldn't just be a document with the most important questions being asked. So yeah, you don't need to go from zero to hero. I think the process of just asking those questions is really what is most important right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. And hopefully like while we're sharing things, we'll share the theory as well along the way. So that way you can take the principles home and say, fine, I get this principle. I get why this is important. How can I experiment with this principle? See the thing that Didi did as an example, see the thing that Marie did as an example of that principle, but take inspiration from it and then say, maybe I can execute it in a different way. And really it's just like learning the underlying thinking, because really good planning is built on like some really basic core principles, and you can do it like with significantly less. I also see people's Notion setups a lot of time, and I'm just like, dude, you don't need to put this in a table and write really advanced formulas. It's really cool, but like, I mean, really, like it's just so extra, like overkill.
It's true.
And the thing is, I think a lot of people that do like go down these routes of like having a very overkill solution to a very simple problem, it's because they enjoy the complexity and like the intricacy and the problem solving. It's more of that. And then like they'll brag like it saves their, like changes their life. And then, even because I know I went through this a million times, and then like 6 months down the road of using, I'm like, probably can get away with half of this process and get the same result. So, you're always keeping yourself honest, but don't get intimidated. There's 1,000 ways to get the same outcome with like significantly less work. And it's, if you understand the principles, you'll find the fastest route there.
I like that. Michael asked, I have a personal Notion account and I'm just starting to build a separate Notion workspace for work. How would you recommend doing a retro with 2 workspaces?
Meaning you want to share your retro with both your team and yourself? Like, what do you mean by having a retro for 2 workspaces?
Yeah, I think that would also depend because like I have my work and personal all in the same Notion, and also you can totally embed task databases and things that live in your workspace into your own workspace as well. So I think it depends if you're self-employed or you're working with a team. I think that might change how I would recommend doing that.
I would keep it simple. I would just like duplicate the retro template, have one in the company workspace, one in yours. Everything that is as it pertains to the company, put there. Everything that pertains to you, put in yours, and in yours, link to the company one, just so you always can go find that information when you're poking around and trying to go back on like information. But there is a certain point where separation of context helps, mainly because you just don't want to personal with yours, and just add that divide, but make it accessible for you. So that way you can see both pieces of information at once. There's nothing you can do there, but the same principles and theories will apply across the board. If you just want to keep certain information private, then put into two separate documents. I don't think it has to be more complicated than that. Assuming that's what he meant by his question.
Yeah, hopefully we can elaborate on some of that when we actually do show our spaces. So some great other questions are coming in. Like Trisha asked, I make plans, but I let daily tasks take over and I forget my plans. I want to try living by my plan. How might I break my bad habit of ignoring my weekly plan?
Oh, yeah. So you're going to see in mine, I don't set just objectives. I also have like time blocks, right? Like, and we'll go into that more in detail. And I think we're going to have to jump into like showing this template if we want to have enough time for all of it.
Yeah.
And you want to make sure that the time is already blocked from your calendar. And then it's just up to you to honor it, right? And to get better at blocking out times in a way that's convenient for you. Like, you don't want to give yourself, really hard work to do like at 7 p.m. when you're exhausted. Like, just don't do that. But as long as you're setting it up, you're blocking out the time, then your calendar should reflect the delta, which is how much time do I have left over to do all the other things. And then when somebody comes up with another thing, hey, I have like something I need to talk to you about, you're looking at your calendar and you're saying, hey, okay, I have 2 slots. Otherwise it comes at the cost of something else. Yeah. And if you're negotiating this with a client, it's very responsible to say, hey, I get this is really important and you want to do this. I have these 5 things on my docket for this week that all the time's reserved for. Happy to re-reserve the time for the thing you want to talk about, but it will come at the cost of either 1, 2, 3 things. You can choose, right?
Like
most people are just going to back off from that. Yeah, it's just they go back off. They go back, okay, this is important to me, but not at the cost of these other things you need to take care of, which is also important to me. So I'll wait until next week. But if you don't block it out, you won't know.
Totally. Even having like non-negotiable days or a non-negotiable half day a week, building in buffer blocks. Like, I block chunks in my calendar from an hour to 2 hours every week. That's just like the shit that comes up that wasn't planned for. So like, actually put that block in your calendar. If you struggle with this and you find stuff comes in that isn't planned for, like Edgar just asked, how do you handle spur of the moment ideas and aha moments that come up as you're working on a weekly task that's relevant to that task? And then it might throw the planned schedule off the train tracks a bit. I think there's got to be some level of, is this essential? Is this nice to have? Is it like a thing I can add down the road? And just building in that buffer as part of your weekly planning for projects. Every project, everything needs a little bit of that margin, and your own schedule needs that margin too. So put buffer blocks and strategic blocks in your calendar, make them busy, non-negotiable, give yourself those non-negotiable spots in your calendar.
Yeah, give yourself like, an hour a day, like you said, buffer to like audit your initial plan. But the more you find yourself doing things reactively instead of methodically, the more you'll find yourself like, making space for these sporadic things, but at the cost of something significantly more important that just takes longer to manifest. So you might not notice it up front, but then the end of the week comes along and you're like, shit, I couldn't get this other thing that's really important done because I was being too reactive to these smaller things. So just try to do it a little more methodically and give yourself some time to like just sit down with yourself and be like, all right, once a day I have an hour. I know that I can sit down and reassess what it is I can prioritize. And worst case, I just won't be able to do it today, but I'll be able to, by the end of the day, reprioritize it if I want to do it tomorrow, right? And just try to just put a little more friction between you and just like responding. Things should slow down and calm down.
Yeah. And if you know that your tendency is to kind of, explore these sort of rabbit holes, you just have to build that into your schedule, build that creative time, build that buffer, but make that a thing that clients cannot book that spot with you. Right.
Yeah, totally.
So why don't we dive into your setup a little bit? And then that way, I'm sure people are going to have more questions, and some of them are a little bit more technical in terms of your specific setup. So do you want to share?
Let's share. Let's do that.
Look
All right,
under the
I'm
hood.
going to move. Let's look under the hood. All right, move that there and share my screen. Let me know when you can see this.
Boom, there we go.
Boom, we're live. Okay, so everybody, There's a dope website. Some really generous guy made it. His name happens to be Didi Medina. It's called bit.ly/Notion Toolbox, where I started publishing a bunch of my templates. They're here. You can duplicate them. So that's bit.ly, bit.ly/Notion Toolbox. Go. The thing through today is the weekly retro and planning. It's right under process. And you can duplicate it. It's going to be available to duplicate it right in the top corner, and you can start playing with it. Cool. So let's start off with some really simple things. This was one of the biggest takeaways I had over doing retros for, I don't know now, 2 years, really, aggressively. I find that naturally retros is like where you start by saying what's working, what's not working, your takeaways, then you plan the next week, right? And when you start off with like a bullet point list and you're just like, what's working, what's not working, psychologically, the things that pop to mind are the things you're most sensitive to. So it could be the things that cause you the most pain, the things that happen most recent. And honestly, a lot of times that's sabotage. It doesn't actually allow you to assess the things that actually stand to have the highest impact on your next plan forward for the next week, right? So first thing before anything, the first principle, I guess you can say, is reset. Like jog your memory before you start writing down anything, right? So I have like a really simple kickoff checklist, which is review yearly objectives, right? This wasn't always like here. I used to like just review the previous like retro, but I found that after doing that sequentially for too long, my plans per week built on the previous week, but also in somehow like diverged from my yearly goals, right? So I find that if you have yearly goals, just read them. That's it. You don't have to do anything fancy. Just skim through them. So review yearly objectives. After that, review objectives from the previous week's retro, right? What you set out to do for the week, jog your memory, what you expected of yourself. And then also review the time allocation on your calendar. Your calendar should read like a story, like a great story. It should be able to tell you, where did my time go? Hopefully, yeah. I try to make a habit of like, even like when things aren't like invites that I send out to people, I'll block it out on my calendar so that again, like at the end of the week, I can go back and jog my memory as like what exactly happened this week. Now, once you do this, now you're ready to start because now you kind of remember the entire context. You're not going to be biased towards the things you're most sensitive to, but rather all of the information that's relevant to the entire week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's great.
Cool. The next thing is situation summary. So I used to have the bullet point thing, which is like what's working, what's not working. Found that to be complete shit. By the way, should I not curse on this? I know
we're like curse friendly.
Okay, good.
I'm making the call.
I'm from Brooklyn, New York. It's just something that comes like ingrained in our DNA.
I have no excuse. Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I'm not apologetic for is like the fact that I never did anything to change that, but we'll all survive. So back to situation summary. I used to have like bullet point lists of what's working, what's not working. And again, I found that to always yield like really like non-contextual, not really deep insight. So what is a situation summary? How does that differ? Instead of writing what's working, what's not working, I'm just writing out the story of what happened that week. Like literally just start like a journal. I started my day on Sunday morning, blah, blah, blah. And you'll see like things just like slip through and you're going to write out the entire story. You can pass over things. You don't have to be like super like, you don't have to write a book. It's not a novella. You can write a couple of paragraphs. And then naturally, as you write, you'll notice that what's working and not working is going to be written out in plain English. And you can go back on your text and just highlight green and red, the working and not working. Right? So I find that to divulge significantly more context when I do situation summary, and then I reread my situation summary and highlight like both green and red, the working, not working. And then I have takeaways. Takeaways are your lessons learned. Don't put stupid shit in here. I think like one of the biggest thing that I tell people is like, if you have no takeaways, it was a vanilla week. Things went according to plan and there's nothing really like, there's no wrenches in there. There's nothing that you need to change. Don't put anything here, right? And that way, when you do have a takeaway, you take it seriously. If there's a takeaway, that means there's gotta be something you gotta do about it. There's like, you gotta put up a plan to like do something about it. If not, if it doesn't have any consequences, don't put it, right? If it's too small, it's not gonna have any consequences, don't put it in there. right? Don't clutter this thing up. So take away title and then take away description. That's usually the format that I put. So I give like a short handle of like what I call it, and then like a description to explain where I got this takeaway from, why it's relevant. Just again, just write naturally. I think like we as humans, we're very decent storytellers. So I like to build a lot of my process around just writing normally instead of like trying to write in some constrained, what comes to mind. If it comes out to be 2 sentences, great. If it comes out to be a paragraph, all like that's perfectly fine. There's no hard rules here. As long as you understand that, that's all that matters, right? So this is like kind of like the thing I think takes about an hour plus to do. Okay. Past this point, everything starts cruising. I'm self-employed, so I have stats, right? This is my funnel. I know that in order for me to bill a certain amount of money, it can be boiled back like backwards to the amount of contacts I have. So contacts is like the amount of people I just add to my hit list. That's just a spreadsheet of people I don't know that I want to get to know, right? Then it's like how many people that I add into contacts that converted into relationships. That means I met them in person or over a video call, right? From there, how many like of them converted into opportunities? From there, how many of those opportunities went into screening, discovering, deciding, working, closing, invoices billed? Now, this is really important for me because if I'm not billing and I see there's a lot of zeros, the answer is like right there, right? And if there isn't a lot of zeros, the what?
It's like do the work, right? Like make the contacts, do the outreach. You got to do the hard work.
So this brings us to the next like principle, which is design systems that hold you accountable. And what I mean by hold you accountable, they make it harder for you to lie to yourself.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? Because it's really easy to like say, oh, I'm being accountable, I'm putting in the work, whatever it is, because you're not going into the details and you can't really see that you're really not actually doing the work. So you can abstract it and float on the potentiality that you are putting in the work. But when you design these kind of systems, it's like very clear. It's written like a night and day. You didn't add any contacts. You didn't make any new relationships. Who are you to expect that there should be new opportunities that you can potentially capitalize on, right? So that's why I have that. Your pipeline can look a little bit different. I think just just like an overlook of my pipeline. Screening is when I look at an opportunity lightly. I maybe talk to like a founder, a new client, like for a quick chat. Discovering was I do like due diligence. I'm like talking to the team more in detail, and I'm trying to figure out the details of the project and put together a plan. Deciding is when I actually write up the plan, the final plan, and I sign the contract with the client. Working is when I'm working on the project. Closing is after I'm done working on it. I have a closing protocol, which is like I reach out for testimonials, all this different stuff. So that's a separate stage as well. But I like to have stages that are very agnostic. Like I don't use words that are too specific, so I can imply what they mean under different contexts, instead of having several pipelines for different types of initiatives.
I like that. A question just popped up.
Yes.
Are there any formulas in the stat section, or is it just a section that you manually add the info? I assume you're manually adding that info.
Manual.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that's really good. I think like you're going to see this also like in the financial section is like you could automate a lot of things, and there's times where you don't want to automate it because the deliberate act of writing it transcribes it into your brain. And again, that enables accountability. So I could always just go back into my records and figure this out if I ever want to figure it out. So why document it? Because it holds me accountable. It makes me like confront the thing that I'm trying to avoid, right? So manual work can actually play to your benefit. Don't always try to automate everything.
And yeah, just it's like again another reminder, right? Like you could have those numbers be popping in, but just not be really conscious of how many sales am I actually making. Yeah, it's that repetition I think is really helpful.
Totally. Awesome. Now we get to, you can see how we go from like wide down to like narrow. We're getting more actionable as we go. So now we're at the section which is objectives and time blocks. No fancy tables, nothing crazy. It's just you set the goal per initiative, and then the time blocks. So let's give an example of what that means. What is the difference between an objective and a time block? Let's say my objective is to launch my new website. right? So first and foremost, that's the objective. What's a time block? A time block would be to say, all right, what are all of the tangible things I can block out in a calendar that I can do that get me to that goal? So I can say it's going to take me 2 hours to brainstorm the content. That's the first time block. Second time block, it's going to take me 1 hour to sketch out some concepts on my iPad, right? Second time block. Then there's a third one to actually do some rough designs, fourth one, etc. You're literally down that naturally sound intuitive to you, where like you probably start and stop work, right? These are separate time blocks. And you'll see soon what we do is we take these time blocks and literally put them into the calendar before we like end the retro. And then you can see like, do I have enough time for all these things, or do I need to negotiate how much I can get done in this week? Now, what is product, service, content, right? And also what's an initiative? Because we've spoken about objectives and time blocks. An initiative, the difference between an initiative and a project is a project has an end date, right? A project is design a website. An initiative is something that doesn't have an end date. It keeps going. For example, a company is an initiative. A team inside of a company is an initiative. The website that they're building is a project, right? So what is the initiative for my website? It's my consultancy. I'm creating the website for my consultancy. So the initiative is my consultancy. I write consultancy because I don't have a name for my business. I sell myself as Didi Medina, right? So there's no like formal name. But if you have a client, let's say I have a client, their name is Salto, right? Is one of my clients. If I have objectives for the week for that client, I first put the initiative, Salto, and there I put the objective, which is iterate on landing page design, hypothetically. And then in there, I put the time blocks, right? You can see, like, we can open this up, and then there's like a time block, and you put in the time blocks. And lastly, what's the difference between product, service, and content? So service is like time that I sell for money. So anything that's like a client that I'm like doing design work for or leadership work for, that would be under service. Product is anything that I'm creating that I have an intent to sell, right? So if I'm writing a book or I am working on a masterclass, that is product. Content doesn't have any intention of making money. It just is stuff that I create, that I put out in the world, either altruistically to help people or as marketing to generate new potential clients that come in like for service initiatives, or content that promotes the products I create, right? So that's kind of like how I split my work and how I look at it. I see products, service, and then content. These are 3 separate verticals. I try to keep a balance of these verticals. So that way I know, like, I'm building products because that brings me passive income. These are the harder things to do. They're not urgent, but they're very important. And then there's service, which usually is more urgent and also somewhat important. And then content, which is probably on the lower end of not urgent nor like super important, right? So that's kind of how I like distribute them. Does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions around that? I really like the way you've separated out those contexts. And of course, I love the idea of just blocking it in your calendar as part of that process, because I think we often, as we've touched upon, we're bad at estimating large chunks of time. So if you actually have to say, put an hour to something, block it in your calendar, you're very quickly going to see those blocks add up. And then if you've got yoga and friend hanging out and whatever, that fills up very quickly. So I love you breaking it up into context and kind of getting it in the calendar ASAP.
And there's definitely a better, there's best practices for when you write a time block. A time block should not sound like a goal, meaning it should be very tangible. It's like, if you put this out like for an hour on your calendar, you know, when you come to your calendar, and as if you have to reference it like a task list, you know exactly what you need to do. If not, it's too ambiguous, like you need to break it down further, right? Do not use vague words. Like, be very keen on using words like, start off every time block by writing block out time 2, and then write design new iteration of website that increases the size of the logo and changes the fonts that I'm using as a baseline, right? Now, that is a better time block instead of writing, okay, design website, because that's the objective. You want to break it down to a smaller piece. Also, the reason why it's a checkbox is once you put it in your calendar, that's when you mark this off. You don't mark this off after it gets completed. You mark it off after you put it in your calendar, right? The retro is something when you're done with, you log it, you're done. You don't come open this back up. Your calendar should be your reference point from that point on.
Love it. And
right?
again,
So
I love the simplicity of this too. Again, like a lot of people get hung up on the features of Notion or how to build this into a database. And I know I go like really crazy on the databases and I love that. But I love that this just shows you it really does not need to be complex. Anyone can start a free Notion account and just keep it really, really simple.
yeah, this is all built up of like really, really, really simple stuff.
And Didi shared the
Um,
template with you, so you've all got it now.
there you go. You can just start writing. It doesn't like connect to like different things.
Amazing.
The
Yeah.
one thing you might want to do is you probably want to create like in your Notion where you can actually like create like instantiate this template every single time. And in a table, you kind of see like the week. So I can show what that looks like. Notion.so. So like if you go to my workspace, you'll see that here I have Didi's retros. This is like just a table. And you can see like all of the retros I have, right? And in the side here, you'll see that all I have is I have like this scoring system that I do in the end after I'm done with the retro. I said exceeded expectations, satisfactory, could be better, unsatisfactory. This is like so that way when I look at my pattern, you guys can see like I have down weeks, right? It's like very normal, but I can see kind of like my pattern. And you'll see that I don't really exceed my own expectations that often, right? Like almost ever. That's like a very rare occasion. And that's when your planning goes well. It's like this to me reads like I'm learning, right? If it was green across the board, that means you're not getting better, right? There's nothing to really take away. But yeah, you can create like a table, a simple list where you can dump these retros into and just give it a timestamp and then sort them by time so they're nicely organized. But that's pretty much it. If you want to do it more janky, you can just like open it and just hold down Alt on your keyboard and drag the page and it'll duplicate it and just keep doing that on the same page. That's also fine. You don't have to add this like table complexity if you don't want to.
Someone asked, is one time block always the same amount of time for you across product, service, content?
Absolutely not, right? So some things take longer. Something like if I'm designing something, it's just I need like 2.5, 3 hours, like just to design the iteration. Like it's not the same as responding to an email. I don't really put that kind of stuff into my time blocks. The time blocks I really reserve. I guess this is a good point to bring up. Time blocks should be focused around deep work, not around shallow work. For people who don't know the difference, I'll give a quick explanation. Deep work is the stuff that it takes you multiple hours to complete and you need to focus on. You have to give your full focus and you can't have distractions. Shallow work is the stuff that is very easy to do. It might be time consuming, but it's very easy to do. It doesn't take a lot of like brain power, like answering. Yeah, it just takes like, it doesn't require like mental like muscle. It just like answering emails or whatever it is. Now, there is times where answering an email can be deep work, like where someone sends you like an email about firing somebody. You know, this has happened to me before and something I need to give a lot of thought to before I respond. So that is a deep work thing. So it's not mutually exclusive, but, you know, definitely try to block out the things that are important and also require focus. All the smaller things, you'll find that there's diminishing returns on like trying to scrutinize yourself of like getting all the small things in there. If you attend to the big things, the deep work things, the small things have their way of just getting done as well, right? And more than that, like you make progress if you focus more on the deep work than you do like on all the shallow stuff. But yeah, I usually when I do when I put out objectives, let's actually look at an example here in one of my previous retros. I'm trying, I hate when, okay, this is some private information, guys, don't like publish this anywhere. So let's see here, right? You have here OBD podcast, the podcast I'm working on. You can open this up and you'll see block out time to review episode with Tom Lohat and compile edit notes. Very clear. And then in parentheses, I write two things: the amount of hours it's going to take and the amount of sessions, right? Sessions implies I might need 4 hours, but it needs to be done over 2 sessions, which means I don't want to do it in one sprint. I want to start, maybe take like an hour and a half to start it off. And then I want to give myself a break to kind of give myself a night to think about it, come back and do the other 2 hours the next day. So this is the two things I put in. 2 hours, like the amount of hours and the amount of sessions, make sure it's clear. And then also make sure you think about like the amount of sessions, because that's also very relevant to different types of deep work. A lot of times there's diminishing returns trying to do 6 hours of one thing continuously. You kind of have to give your brain some rest to kind of recalibrate. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it.
Cool. All right. Before more personal information is shared.
That's always a challenge when you're sharing your space.
Cool. So that's like objectives and time blocks. The next section is financials. Again, this is something your wife might be doing or your partner might be doing, and you don't look after the finances, so you can just X this out of your retro. I don't know. But this is really important to me. I like auditing my spending every single week because I've known to be a spender. Like, as you guys can see, there's this crazy setup for like lighting and all this different stuff. Costs me money. I probably don't need it. So I try to monitor my habits as like how I spend. You have like this table here, how much money you spent this week, right? So look at your credit card statements. If you spent some in cash, estimate it, add it up. And then you put in how much you have in liquidity, how much you have in debt, how much you have in investments. And if there's any clarifiers, you put that in the notes. Right. And then the time frame. So when you create a new row, you're just going to go in here and choose the time frame. You're going to set an end date. So it's probably going to be a range. We'll say it's for this week. So we'll do here. And the end date is going to be the 25th or something. Right. So that's your time frame. So that way you can then sort it by the time frame. That's pretty much it. Financials. And then there's the wrap up. Wrap up is really simple. Some tasks you need to do before you shut down the week. So I put mine as examples, but feel free to like refactor all of this. Block out deep work sessions on calendar based on objectives set out for the week. So I go back to what's in here. I open up my calendar and I start putting things in. That's pretty much what I do. It should be pretty easy to do that. The thinking's done. You're just putting it in, and then if you realize you overbooked yourself, you start negotiating what you're going to get done, what you're not going to get done, and prioritize. Great.
Do you ever look at this retro throughout the week, or is it kind of like you've done it because it's been time blocked and then you're kind of done with it, or do you revisit every now and then?
I never reopen it until the next week where I look back. I try to transfer the context that's in here that's relevant to me throughout the week to my calendar. So that way I don't have to open this up. And I guess it's another principle. When you design processes for yourself, if upkeeping the process has too much friction, you're likely going to fail at it. So for me, when I designed it in a way where this became my point of reference, and I always had to go back into the Notion and go into it and like find it, I would do that less compared to like if it's just in my calendar where I'm looking all the time, and all the information I need, the lucrative information I need is there, so I don't have to open this up. So I transfer out the context that's really important into Google Calendar. And then that way I don't really need to open this up until the end of the week.
Nancy asked, can you show how to move the table out of the template and link to it? And Nancy, I'm wondering, are you referring to kind of embedding a database so that you could kind of embed a database that lives elsewhere, or?
Is she talking about the spending database here? Or are you talking about like the database where I create the list of restros?
She's referring to the financials. Can you show how to move the table out of the template and link to it?
Yeah. So in essence, all you need to do is move it wherever you want, right? I'm just going to give this a unique name so I can find it. Let's say taco. And then I'm going to move this into the toolbox, right? So now it's gone. Where is financials? There we go. And then you do here, link to table, link to page. Link to database. Wait, is there a link to database? How did I do this last time? Is it linked to page?
You can just hit, well, you should be able to do and then the name of the.
No, but you want to embed it, not just like link to it. There we go.
Oh,
so
create,
the database
a
database is treated like a page. So there's a little bit of confusion there, but like / link to page. And you can see here spending taco. And when you do that, now didn't do what I wanted it to do. Hold up.
Are you trying to embed it? You can type / create linked database.
Create linked database. Okay, that's what I'm looking for.
So you can either link to it, or you can create
there you
create
go.
a link to an external database.
And now we're going to type in spending, and then we'll go, there's taco. Now you're going to see it's going to embed it here. So now every time you kind of add something, it's going to be here and also in your centralized place. And that's how I have it. Like I have a separate document in my Notion that's called financials, where the master lives. And then inside the retros, it's instantiated. By the way, do we have a hard stop? It's 8:55. Well, it's 10:55.
I'm a little bit flexible. If you're flexible, it's totally up to you. I want to respect your time.
No, totally. It's the end of the day. I can go over by 30 minutes.
Cool.
But yeah, I just want to make sure people there's like a lot of information.
Yeah.
Getting done. Ask questions.
People can always watch the replay.
I'm just going to. Yeah. Well, clarifying questions. So I'm going to just undo this, but that's how you would do it. So you could, right when you get this, I'm just Command Zing until I see the thing. There we go. No. Come on now. What is going on?
Not undoing.
Oh, it's just loading. There we go. Now we're back. Okay, so this is here. So you can start off by taking this, putting it elsewhere, then linking it back into your template. Once you have your retro template, then duplicate that. Don't touch the master. Just duplicate it before you start creating your first retro.
Awesome.
That's how I do that. So checklist, block out deep work sessions on calendar based on objectives set out for the week. So we showed how to do that. Then block out workout routine on calendar for the week. That's important to me. Again, if you don't block it out, it's not going to happen. Or you stand a higher chance of like moving things around and just getting a lot of things done. Doing a lot of things, but not getting a lot of things done, or doing a lot of things and not getting the important things done. Right. So there's that. Groom existing task lists and add any new task reminders needed for the week. Groom hit list and opportunities. So this is like my CRM. Send out outstanding follow-ups via email, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, etc. Notify team retros completed via WhatsApp or email. Clear expenses in QuickBooks. Send out any outstanding invoices and mark paid invoices off in Harvest. That's what I use for invoicing. So I guess like a lot of this might not be relevant for you, but it's really good like examples, so it can get your creative juices going. Feel free to delete them and put the ones that are relevant. The last thing is to remember you are human. So I have an audit that I do on my behaviors every single week. This is like a survey I created that I continue to edit based on things I'm trying to work on myself. So my survey is really simple. As you can see, there's a thread here. Did you refrain from buying things you don't need and spending money you don't have? Yes, mostly no, right? Did you generate new connections? Yes, that would be roughly 3, mostly 1 or no. Were you supportive in emotional conversations and frank and functional conversations? I'm a manager. I lead a bunch of teams. This is a really important one. I try to really think about this every single week. Work ethic. Did you wake up early on weekdays? Yes, 6 times, mostly 4 times, no, less than 3 times. Did you get enough deep work sessions in this week? So yes, that would be 6, mostly would be 3, no would be under 2. Because that's I assume I can get at least 6 deep work sessions to have a good week. And this is a really important thing for me because sometimes I'm like, oh, I was really busy this week, but I didn't get anything done. And like, then you realize, well, shit, I really didn't have any deep work sessions. So probably I was being really reactive, and there's probably a bigger thread to pull on here that I need to go relook before I conclude that it isn't out of my control, right? Did you complete what you set out to do for the week entirely? Mostly no. Did you meditate? Did you stick to clean eating? Did you work out? Right. So this is my weekly behavior audit. Once I'm done with that, I go back to the top. I score it. I have like that score of like exceeded expectations, satisfactory, whatever. And I go to sleep.
Like a baby.
I don't know why people say that though. Like babies don't sleep.
I know.
So like in Hebrew we say Yoshen כמו buba, which is like to say you sleep like a doll. That makes more sense because dolls don't move, sense. Right? Yeah. But like I never understood the baby thing. Some people I heard say like I sleep like a log. Okay, but like babies don't sleep, so I don't know where that came from. But yeah, I check out. And I'm usually like really good. I'm way better like to the people that are in my
Yeah.
life on my weekends. I'm like way more attentive, less anxiety. I'm there, and that's the more important part of my life. Is like I don't work to make money. I work to have a lifestyle. And if you don't practice your lifestyle, if you don't have time for your friends, you don't have time for the things that are outside of work, you're doing it wrong. It's not serving anything significantly meaningful. So
Yeah.
I definitely love to see myself get to the weekend and just be more attentive and be more available emotionally and mentally, because I've kind
Yeah.
of locked things in with the open loops, if you may.
Yeah, I can definitely see why this would reduce your anxiety. Like you said, the closing those open loops, just like finishing conversations, just closing the book for the week. I think it's brilliant.
And sometimes
And
like
so
the loop is
simple.
still open, right? Like sometimes the loop is still open, but at least you know that there's nothing to panic about. It's an open loop. I know it's there, and I know I can get to it next week. So even still, the anxiety is gone. You don't have to assume you have to literally end everything you started. You just need to know that it's in good sitting. Like you can leave it and nothing's going to blow up.
Yeah. And just that you have a plan for it for the next week, right?
Exactly.
Um, so we do have a couple other questions. Let's see if we can go through some of these. And some of them may not be relevant to your particular setup because, Didi's setup doesn't use many databases other than the financials. And I love the simplicity of it. I know mine is very database heavy, and so I do a lot of roll-ups and things like that. But there are parts of yours that I like that I think I might add as little prompts at the bottom of my weekly agenda too. So Edgar asked, please show how we can use the weekly tracker to display relevant roll-ups that help visualize the important items that are on the front burner. And so, I mean, that's more relevant in my setup. I feel like, Edgar,
Yeah.
I feel like I could probably do like another YouTube video that goes into my updated my updated weekly setup. So maybe I can answer that in a separate call. I don't know if we'll have time to kind of get into it today in detail. Someone else asked, will you be sharing your changed, updated new weekly agenda? I will do I'll definitely do an updated YouTube video on that. Victoire, do you do daily and weekly tracking? If so, how do you separate and connect the two? So it looks like yours was less on the daily, and you're really doing it kind of at the end of the week. So do you do any kind of like daily checkpoints as part of this process?
When you do weekly planning well,
Mm.
you understand the benefits of that and all that. You realize that daily planning kind of transitions into daily audits, right? Like you're not really doing anything heavy. You know what you need to get done. It's already on your calendar. You're just double checking, does this still make sense? Or do I need to nudge things by about 15, 20%? I find that I'm rarely wrong more than like a 20% margin, because again, you're not planning that far out. You're getting very detailed. You're also doing a much better job assessing the past week and your situation before you plan. Assuming you stick to all these principles, like where you reflect effectively, your plan will be more effective. And thus, like when you go down to the day level, you'll find yourself like tweaking, maybe like
Yeah.
here and there, like you're massaging things, but like you're not making big shifts,
And I'm
which
sure
is
part
kind
of
of
that just
refreshing.
comes with, yeah, I'm sure it comes with experience, right? Like you've obviously been like honing your process over years and years, and you've found the flow that makes a lot of sense for you. So,
Mhm.
I do encourage people, despite your resistance, like to start simple and really give it a shot and see if it works for you. And you're going to find the questions that are going to make the most sense for you. But I think your template's such a great starting point.
Yeah, it's super light. It doesn't, well, that's subjective. It doesn't
Yeah.
use data. It's light on the Notion technical features, right? It's just like it uses the things you're already good at. Everybody's good at journaling. Just write down. Nobody's reading this except for you. If it makes sense to you, it's fine.
Yeah.
Like if I read out loud like some of the things I've journaled about, oh my God, dear God, that
Yeah.
shit is broken English. Like it doesn't make sense. Like one like train of thought starts, another one ends, and like it's fine. Like if it reads to you, gets the information out of your brain, like you'll find that the thing that works really well with journaling as opposed to like bullet point lists is like you need to like continuously get to the points by kind of progressing through the previous points. You have to
Yeah.
add the connective tissue, and that prevents you from making too many leaps, like where you go from this to that, but rather you have the transition. And a lot of time there's a lot of juice in that transition. It's like, why did I go from this all the way to this? That is really important, right? So yeah, and you'll find it to be really natural. Just like, this is what I did this week, and then this threw a wrench, and I got really pissed. And play devil's advocate with yourself
Yeah,
and talk, and you'll be fine.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of other little questions have come in. What are your general min-max lengths for a deep work session, and how many do you typically have per week?
How many deep work sessions do I have per week? So I have 10 deep work sessions a week. 3 of them are already allocated to personal projects and also retrospective retros and planning. The wrap is a full deep work session, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how much deep work sessions do I have? 10. How much do I have available for clients? Usually around 6 to 7. If we're taking into consideration personal projects, you're down to 4, right? So that's kind of like how I look at it. I do not measure any other time. Like, I'm not, meaning I put things on the calendar. I do not scrutinize to anything that is shallow in nature. I find that taking all the time that I spent doing that and doubling down on scrutinizing my deep work time, one, I saved a lot of time because measuring your shallow work is kind of time consuming. And not all of it gets transferred back into deep work. So you get some time back. That's first. And second, that stuff like literally has 90%, 80% of the gain. So it's like where you should be spending all your time anyways.
Love that.
Yeah.
Do you also use a separate to-do list, to-do app, or does everything live in Notion?
Great question. I think yes, I know I use a different to-do list. I use things on my iPhone. The principle that leads that is, when you're trying to put in to-dos, you want it to be really good at quick capture and quick access. That is not where Notion shines, right? Like, if you have an architecture inside of Notion, you need to go into a page, a project, a third page, whatever it is. Even when you use favorites, it takes a while to get access to it. It takes a while to put information in. So you have to have systems and tools that work for different things. And to-dos are very reactive. They're very spontaneous. You want something that can work with Siri. I like things because it works with Siri, and also it works with email. Like, if I email a specific email address, that email automatically becomes a to-do, my to-do list. So it's really, really good at quick capture. Whereas like really good at documentation, really good at bigger picture stuff, like more depth stuff, not shallow stuff, but depth stuff.
The objectives and goals, yeah.
Exactly. So yeah, definitely use a different one, and I recommend you do.
Lucky asked, I'm considering implementing Notion as a high school teacher for my students. What 2 or 3 elements would you suggest we focus on first?
Well, it depends a lot on what exactly you're trying to do with your students.
Yeah, that would depend.
So let's come back to that. Give some context. We'll come back to that question.
Do you use a yearly objectives template? Your weekly template says to review the yearly objectives. I'm curious how you set your yearly objectives.
Great question. If you guys go to bit.ly/Notion Toolbox, under purpose, which there's 3 columns: purpose, process, practice. Under purpose, there's a year manifesto. That is my template for setting goals for the year. And that's also available. We're not going to go into the details of that, but you're going to find a lot of common threads. And there's documentation built into it. So for every section, there's a how-to that explains how to use it. So I would use that as well to do your yearly planning. In your in your retro template, link to that. So instead of writing review yearly objectives, link the word objectives to your yearly manifesto. So you can quickly click on it and open it up in a new tab. It just makes it easier. But yeah, you can use both alongside one another.
Out of curiosity, are there some features you would like to see in Notion that are not there yet?
Oh, hell yeah. Okay, let's see.
No,
there's smaller ones, right? Like, everybody can say the API. That's like a cliche. There's something I really, really wish that was there. Is I use a lot of templates in Notion. I would love, a feature where instead of having a text block, I can have a dummy text block, which means I can put text in it, but when you click on it the second time, it erases it and resets it into a regular text box.
Like a filler,
right? Because So it's placeholder text. And that would be very useful because I use a lot of documentation that's only relevant before you start writing and no longer relevant after. So I'd love to put my documentation as placeholder text. The second you click on it, it erases it. And I can see that working kind of has a configuration state, and then it converts itself, it evolves itself into a regular text box the second it gets clicked on. So that'd be really cool. Let's see what else. Templates inside of tables, I found executed really poorly. So right now, if you want to create a template for a database, by the new button, there's like a little drop down. You click on that and you can create a new template and it lives there, right? The thing that I like to do is I like to use a template button, and inside the template button, I use link to page, which allows me to put all my templates in one Notion repository page, right? And always link, and it instantiates it. I'm probably talking over like a lot of people's head. If you're advanced, you know what I'm talking about. If not, don't worry about it. It all works. So in the tables, it would have been really cool if creating a template worked exactly like the template button, where you click it and then you have like a field where you can link to a page and instantiates it. That would be really, really dope. So that way I don't have to like manage like templates in 7 different
move to
places.
It's a bit weird. Yep, totally agree with that. Lucky was saying he teaches AP World History. I wonder if
Right,
it might be worth watching we did a past office hours the student one, and it was all about like I'm totally blanking. I'll follow up with some links to any of the things that we mentioned here, any of the templates, but I have a office hour session I think might be worth you watching.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that'll be helpful.
That's awesome.
Blanking on it right now. Considering sharing my weekly wrap up with my investors, is there a way to pull the relevant content into a different page or folder that could be shared outside of the organization? I don't really want them to know what personal habits I'm working on and other personal things. Definitely, yes, you can share those documents. I don't know if you have opinions on that, Didi, but you can absolutely create, client special folders and pages that you can share only those pages with investors.
Yeah, I agree. I can like advised a bunch of tech companies where they have the same problem. They use Notion for themselves, they use it for their company, and they also have to share with different people at different points in time. My advice in that situation is understand that first it has to work for you before it works for others, because if it doesn't work for you, you're sharing like broken information down the chain. So first have something that works for you. And now if you want to control privacy, you don't want them to see certain things. Personally, I would never share my retro with anybody because not because it's personal, just because it's like very lengthy. It's written in a way only I can understand. It should read like your mom's recipe book, right? It's like you open it up and you're like, Ma, like I don't understand the meatball like recipe. Like what is this? She's like, it only has a 20% that I usually forget, like nothing else, right? And that's the right way to write it. It's for you, not for anybody else. So when you need to share stuff with other people, that is a roll-up of the information you wrote for yourself, create a summary. You'll save them a lot of time. You'll make it much easier for you to get your thoughts out. If you're constantly trying to get your thoughts out in a way that's going to work for everybody, it's just not going to come out. So write it sloppy, write it like dirty, like it's fine. And then do a roll-up separately in a summary way that other people can benefit from, and it's framed in a way that's good for the investors. And I think that would be a better approach.
You could even have like a page, I guess, embedded at the bottom of that retro that could be the one that's intended to be shared with the investors and only share that particular page. But as part of your process, maybe you go in and summarize. That'd be a checkbox. Summarize my summary and put it into the one that I'm going to share publicly.
Totally, that would be like a really, really natural native place to put it. So if you're thinking about organization, where should this investor version live? I think that's golden. It's like right there in there is like all the roll-ups at the bottom. That sounds really, really cool.
Mike asked, do you consider improving your Notion architecture deep work? How often do you refine your Notion system and how much time do you spend?
I literally have, so I'm a product designer. So I design software, I design systems. I'm better than like a lot of people who don't come from my line of work at doing this. And an analogy that I like to give when I give demonstrations and teach how to use Notion and build processes inside of Notion at different workshops is first understanding that Notion, if you have to compare it to, let's say, Asana or to some other tool, right, is the difference between like getting an apartment that's furnished versus getting an empty plot of land, right? One is very opinionated, right? But it's ready to go. Like you can just go like right into the apartment, it's furnished, and do a deep dive right into your bed and like you're good, you can go to sleep. Now, an empty plot of land has a lot of potential, but Not everybody,
Is
there's
an
a saying in
architect.
management. Exactly. Not everybody's an
Yeah.
architect, right? So you can get really overwhelmed and really lost. And that's why it's really good that people share their templates, because that allows you to have a starting point. But there's a saying in management where it's like, sometimes you have to be careful not to give people too much rope. They might hang themselves, right? So it very much applies even to yourself, because you have the choice to give yourself that rope, right? And I find myself a lot of times giving myself that extra rope, even though I'm good and I'm good at this stuff, and I choke myself out. Like, I'm just like, this was too much, right?
Like you over-engineer it, then you step back a bit, right? And you kind of
exactly. And that's a natural process. I'm not like against it. I like going into deep end and be like, oh, that was too far. Let's come back and simplify, right? I've also had tables with roll-ups and all different stuff in my retros, and I was like, this is not. It doesn't add like a magnitude of like value. It just increments it by 2%. So I was like, screw it, keep it simple. And it took me a while to like, simplify. And that's a process too. But I would just say, just like, be careful. Don't go crazy.
Procrastinating, we call it, right? It's the spending too much time on the planning.
Oh, but actually, like, how much time did I spend doing it?
Or like, do you build it? Do you build it into your time? Like, I guess I wouldn't consider that deep work. You're probably like tinkering and playing as you go, right? It's not like I need a good 2 hours to like work on my Notion setup, right?
So my Notion, you'll find two types of people in Notion, and I think I found only one other person that falls under the second person where I fall category, which is, if you look at the side panel of people's Notion, you might see like 100 like files, right? Yeah. And these people are in the Bandcamp, like where they use search a lot to find the things that they're in. My Notion has one thing, like literally one thing, Didi's workspace. My architecture went through a significant amount of deep work. It's an application I designed. There's a natural path as to like where to find anything, right? And you can think about it very simply and get to it, right? And because of that, I don't have 100 things on the side, and I never really just tinkered. There has been moments where I tinker, right? But most times I do my retros. I say like I try to find what's working, what's not working. And if there's any takeaways from that, I literally give myself 3 hours on the calendar, and pretty much say, okay, fine. Need to figure out how to solve this. It starts with like wireframe, like whiteboarding the problem, creating an object map of how things talk to each other. I keep an active current object map inside of a tool called Whimsical, which is like for mind maps and stuff like that, of like my architecture for Notion, so I can keep up with it. And I've evolved the terminology, I've evolved the architecture, I've done all these different things on a much more significant level and a much more deep level. And absolutely, it took a lot of deep work. And I think in the past year and a half, I spent north of like 300 hours doing it. And I love it. It exercises like things I love doing, but it's a good challenge. But yeah, it definitely takes a lot of work for me.
Like you said, there's that anxiety reduction when you feel like you have found the tool suite that really works for you and is helping you be productive. So there is a fun element in optimizing, right? Kind of, ooh, how can I make this a little bit better, but not going too far.
And that's the thing. I opted in to being the person who buys an empty piece of land, right?
Yeah.
And accepting the fact that the overhead that comes with that is it's
going to take some work, right?
Yeah, it's gonna take some work. And there's less of the convenience of like everything's ready to go, right? And you're right. Sometimes when you find an apartment that's furnished, it's exactly to your liking, right? But that rarely happens. Yeah, it could happen. It just rarely happens, right? And you're usually making compromises, and that's why people complain about like, oh, Thon is so limiting, and this doesn't do what I need it to do. And then when they come to Notion, like, oh, anything's possible. And then 2 months down their journey, they're like, oh, I'm so frustrated. It's like what you think. That's the cost of doing business here.
So true. That's a great analogy. I think that's exactly how to put it. And for some people, when they complain about it, they're like, why would I use Notion when Asana's already kind of ready to go? I'm like, great, use Asana. Like if it works for you, you should totally use it. But if it's not working for you and there's friction and there's a better way to design something that's going to work for you, it might be worth exploring.
And process needs to be created and maintained. Yeah. Don't forget that.
And it's very like productivity is super personal, process is super personal. So you're going to look at someone's setup and template and be like, that's like either too simple or too complex or doesn't work. Switch it out, play with it, try it out, see what works for you.
Yeah. And just be methodical, right? It's like you're not gonna hope is not a business plan and it's not a plan, period, right? Like you don't just like throw things out and hope something sticks. That's the
Yeah.
equivalent of like putting a blindfold on, taking a bunch of darts and throwing them at the wall, hoping something hits the bullseye. Now you might strike luck once in a while, but you won't, even when you do, you don't know why it works, so you can't reproduce the same result. So
Yeah.
try to be methodical, try to use your retros as an opportunity to really reflect. And if you guys remember, when I have like product, service, and content, when I create myself tools, that goes on the product, right? Like I'm creating a product, granted I'm not selling it, but
Right.
it's for myself, right?
Yeah.
But it is a creation of a product. That's how I look at it. It's a project. It goes through the pipeline. I do due diligence. I do a bigger like assessment of like what are the challenges, what are the things that absolutely need to be improved. I create a long list and then I sort them out between what's important versus what's urgent versus what's like both important and urgent. I organize sort of however you want. And you're like, okay, this is like the 10-20% of the chunk that I can bite off in the next 2 months that stands to add the most value. Block out 6 hours in your next retro's time block after you assessed it, and then start getting to work, right? Like
Yeah.
it is, I love it. I love laying down the bricks. Some people don't.
Yeah. Love it. No, I think you gave people a really amazing starting point. I did add the link below in the call to action there. So if anybody wants to download those templates, you totally should. I had a last minute question pop up. What's the biggest lesson that you learned about yourself as a result of doing these retros that caused a major change in your life and business? That's a great question.
All right. Let me put this. I am full of shit. That's what it is. It's like the thing is like when you go down the path of creating processes, some people might see it as like a way of taking creativity and making it mundane, right? And there is a place from like creativity, and you should never try to over process things, but you'll know the process is working when you can't lie to yourself, right? So we spoke about this, and
Yeah.
like there's so many moments like in the past year and a half where I'm like, oh I'm so full of shit, like I am not
To
doing the thing I
yourself,
need
right?
to do.
It's like,
Yeah, to
yeah.
myself. And that is like, yeah, it's like across the board. Like when you stop, reflect, and you have good tools, you have good processes, they hold you accountable. I think the way I look at process is not this mechanical thing, but rather the way I like to explain process, or the balance of process, is it pretty much polices human insecurity, right? That's the way I look at process. You are human. You are biased. You are going to do a bunch of things wrong that are going to feel intuitive to you, and then create clever stories to justify why it's right, right? And good process mitigates that bullshit.
Yeah.
Now, if you create too much process, you won't maintain it and you won't respect it. And it's like, there's no point of a process that is not honored, right? Or not used, right? So don't do
Yeah.
anything that, even if it's a good process for me and it would work for you, if you're too intimidated to uphold it, right? Like it's too real for you. It's holding you too accountable. Like it's just like too much at once. Back off, right? Like
Yeah.
that's also important to know. Like bring yourself up.
Know your limits a
might
bit, right? Yeah.
exactly, because like if you're doing it right, you might have moments like that where you're like, this is too real.
It's
Like, and
uncomfortable. Yeah. Yeah.
you can step back a little bit and work your way into it. It's not go for the compounding gains. You're work in progress. We're human. It's fine. But don't make things dry. Like make it a way to kind of have more time to think about what's next. To if you have good process, I find myself being more creative. Why? Because when I can standardize the things that usually get in my way of being true with myself, honest with myself, and I take care of that, one, I turn out to be more performant. Now I'm more performant with less energy. What's left over? More energy. So I can use that energy to be creative and do a bunch of cool stuff that I'd never even had the bandwidth to do. When I'm more performant, I can stop to be like, all right, where do I want to travel? Where do I want, like, what clients do I want? What matters, right? And you don't really have the privilege to do that if you're not first getting a grip on the things that are very, like, just occupying your day-to-day and all that different stuff. So I definitely think process has its place. And you'll see that in my toolbox, that's why I break down 3 main pillars. I believe people are performing under 3 main criteria that are addressed: purpose, process, and practice, right? If you don't have why you're doing what you're doing, like front and center, nothing you add a process to ever amounts to something, right? Then there's process, the ability to standardize the things you do frequently to make things more predictable so you can have more time left over to figure out what's next, which refuels into process. But then there's practice, like the actual act of doing the thing you need to do. And if you don't like hone that as well, the system breaks. So these are like 3 pillars. You can think about them like a chair, and with 3 feet, you have something stable. With 2, it falls. So you have to keep a balance.
I love that insight. Seriously, I think this was like super valuable. I hope other people got a lot of value out of this too. And, let us know in the chat if you feel inspired to either create a weekly process. Maybe you're going to use Didi's, maybe you're going to make your own. I know I'm going to be going and tweaking my weekly process. So I really appreciate that. I think it's really awesome. Seriously, let's post the link in there again, just in case people want to download that. So Didi, thank you so much for today's session. Seriously, I learned a lot. I really love always hearing the way, other designers think about their process. And I think it sounds like it was great. Lots of people are excited. And so I will definitely record a video of my updated process too. I always learn when I see people like yourself. And so always tinkering and tweaking my setup. So Edgar, I will share in my next YouTube video. I'll share kind of how I do mine.
And to everybody, you can also follow me on Instagram at that guy Didi. I'm trying to push out more content on tutorials around like process leadership, because this is what I do with teams all the time. So there's definitely like breakdowns on how to do yearly planning. I try to consolidate it into something you can swipe through like in 5 seconds and really get the main points. So if you want to learn some stuff, check me out there. That should be like a lot of fun. And if you have any questions, you can always like hit me up directly. I'll try my best to answer fast. So that's hi@didimedina.com. And obviously, like we said, check out the templates, play with them. If you have questions about them or ideas, hit me up. I'm always down for a brainstorm and for some feedback. So.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. Have a wonderful weekend. Yes, I will include the, what we try to do is we send a follow-up note with sort of all of the links and takeaways and things from the session. So if you did attend this session, you should receive an email with a wrap-up for that. Oh yeah, Reggie was asking about your YouTube gear and setup and stuff like that. So maybe that's something for you to do a post on or to share with folks, kind of your whole setup.
Oh God, yeah. I put that on my story like the other day. I'm still like working through. You guys can see like behind me, so the wooden panels, they're like half made acoustic panels. Like you can see the foam inside. I didn't wrap them yet. So, like it's still all in progress. Since it's blurred out, it just looks dope. But like, yeah, it's but yeah, check me out on Instagram. I post a lot of this stuff. And hit me up if you're curious about the gear list. I'd be happy to like respond directly. I'm not a massive like YouTuber content creator, so like you can just ask me directly. I'm more like a personal person. I'm trying to help and add value, but like I'm still figuring out like how to find time to contribute back. So if I don't put the content up, like just reach out. Like I'll try to answer.
Hit him up. Awesome.
Hit me up.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
See you on the next office hours, guys. Thank you.
Later, everybody.